Here she already is. This is Silvia Anghel, our next speaker, and she's leading the IVD team at Medidee, and she developed a strong scientific expertise in research in highly competitive and international laboratories in Canada and Switzerland, performing research in the field of oncology, metabolism-related disorders, and gastroenterology. She acquired industrial experience by working for numerous years at different positions in industry in the field of IVD and managed projects in many areas, including development, manufacturing, regulatory, and quality. Her presentation is entitled Transition to IVDR Compliance Tactics and Business Cases. Silvia, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So the scope, the aim of my presentation is to provide you a flowchart of activities that need to be considered for the IVDD to IVDR transition. So for the purpose of this talk, I give an example, a diagnostic test for cancer, and I will try to underline the quality management system and the technical documentation that should be implemented by the IVD manufacturer when performing this transition to IVDR. So taking this example of the cancer the test for the cancer diagnosis, assuming that the legal manufacturer is in Europe and the test is not listed on the list A or B, or it's not a self-test under the IVDD, it means that the legal manufacturer is able to put on the market the product by self-certification, meaning that it's issuing a declaration of conformity, it's notifying the device prior to putting on the market to the competent authorities. So basically what it means is that those legal manufacturers who have currently on the market self-certified tests will make the conformity assessment of their quality management system and technical documentation by themselves. So meaning that the legal manufacturer declares that their quality management system and technical documentation is compliant with the essential requirements of the IVDD Annex 1. Unfortunately, what we have seen here at Medidee when reviewing technical documentation of self-certified tests is that the technical documentation is quite poor, especially concerning the data, the clinical evidence, which will allow substantiation of intended purposes. We observed several to give you an example, again, for a cancer diagnostic test that we have seen new biomarkers which are used and put on the market with no substantial scientific evidence, and also claims made by the legal manufacturer, claims of diagnostic of different cancers such as melanoma, breast, and colon cancer. And then when looking to the data clinical evidence available, in fact, the clinical performance studies were performed only on samples, a few retrospective samples, and only on samples from colon cancer. So as a conclusion of this slide will be to say that from our experience and with the current technical documentation available for some of the legal manufacturers who already have a test on the market under self-certification, it is probably, it means that their conformity assessment by a notified body will probably be very difficult or not be successful. To see here, as explained in the slide above, and also you heard it already by talks this morning, 80% of the tests which were on the market under the IVDD were by self-certification. Now is this swift in the paradigm, and more than 80% of the tests under the IVDR will go through a conformity assessment with the involvement of a notified body. As you see here, only a few, 20 to 10% of the tests will still be made on the market by self-certification, which are the Class A products. So in this case, if I take the example again of a cancer test for diagnosis of cancer, well, it was self-certified under the IVDD and now will be classified as a Class C product. It means that the gap between the technical documentation, as we can observe it right now, and the requirements of the IVDR will be huge. And those gaps in the technical documentation, and particularly in the clinical evidence, will have to be filled in the next 2 years. So one step when you start thinking as a legal manufacturer of how to perform the transition from the IVDD to IVDR is to get the knowledge. So getting the knowledge is exactly what you are doing today by trainings which are available on the website and online, where the legal manufacturer need to understand the IVDR regulation, the IVD regulation, and also the requirements, and also to empower and train their staff. I'm particularly thinking here of the top management, who needs to understand the involvement and the budgets and the timelines, and also project and product manager, and of course the RA and QA staff. Once you get the knowledge, and because we are only two years above the transition to the date of application of the in vitro diagnostic regulation, we need to start to identify what are the gaps in the quality management system, in the technical documentation, also to implement and to find good solutions which are effective and rapid, to plan them, to fix timelines, and also to implement. So the next step will be to identify and plan the activities. Of course, as said before, the reclassification of the devices is one of the main steps, because it will allow you to find and to determine what is the certificate, assessment route for your devices. The classification is stated in the Annex 8 of the IVDR. Once you confirm the assessment route for all your products, you will know if the conformity assessment of your product will involve notified body or not. I'm here we can also talk about what Michael said this morning with those cash cow products. Those may be one of the first products on which you may assess the quality of their technical documentation. I will not talk here about the strategy of sampling. It was mentioned by Sabine, and she maybe will talk later about it. But if several devices are available, you may implement for the conformity assessment some strategy of sampling for the Class B and C devices. This is not available for Class D devices. So to implement once the classification and the conformity route is known, the legal manufacturer needs to, first of all, to identify the gaps. The easiest way to start by identifying the gap would be to assess the compliance of your documentation and your quality management system with the requirements of the GSPR. So the GSPR are the new ER. So under the IVDD, we had the essential requirements. There were 8. A total of 8. Now under the IVDR, we have the general safety and performance requirements, and there are 20 of them. All are listed in the Annex 1 of the IVDR. This will allow you to identify the compliance of the existing QMS with the IVDR, and also to evaluate the current technical documentation with the requirements as per Annex 2 and 3 of the IVDR. It will also help you to identify if you have gaps in your clinical evidence, not only, and I'm talking here clinical evidence, I'm talking about the analytical performance, clinical performance, and also scientific validity. It will be good also to review the labeling of the product as the new requirements are introduced by the IVDR, such as the UDI. And also, you may review the activities related to the post-market surveillance and post-market performance follow-up activities, as we have seen it up to now. Most of the self-certified tests, the legal manufacturer for self-certified tests, are now have a few or not at all activities related to PMS and to PMPF. Additionally to that, there are new requirements which are introduced by the vigilance, so you may also reassess the vigilance process and to assess its compliant, if it's compliant with the IVDR. We also have to mention here the role of the economical operators. Under the IVDD, most of the responsibility of an in vitro diagnostic device was on the shoulders of the legal manufacturer. Now, with the new regulation, in fact, all the economical operators, which are called MAIDs, meaning manufacturer, authorized representative, importer, and also distributor, have their own responsibilities, which are stated in the as article from the IVDR. This also involves a review of the current agreements, not only with supplier, but also to see contracts that you may have with all the other economical operators. So once you have identified gap, and of course for any of those gaps, you have to find solutions, and solutions which are effective and also which are rapid, because we still have only 2 years left, you need to build a roadmap. Here you have to set up achievable timelines. You have to have an idea as a legal manufacturer, what are the timelines that you need in order to implement those gaps. You need to make sure that you have the enough resources, knowledgeable resources, and also to evaluate the budget. Of course, all those implementation of the gaps and the updates in the quality management system and technical documentation means that it will have some additional costs. Once the timelines are fixed and you have a precise idea about your plan and the solutions that you would like to implement, you may start selecting the notified body if you do not have one. So it means that for all the certified, self-certified in vitro diagnostic devices, if you are a manufacturer and you only have self-certified devices, you may have already an ISO 13485 certification, so you are already in contact with a certified body. You may see with him if he's dropping or not the IVD business under the IVDR. As said before, for the moment, there are only 3 notified bodies which were designated under the IVDR, DECRA, BSI, and TÜV-SÜD. You need also to check what are the leading times in order to get an assessment of your documentation. To give you an example, with a big notified body right now, what we have seen with the clients is that only to have an audit, a certification audit for a QMS, we are already on a timeline of about 8 to 9 months. So once you had you got the knowledge, you identified the gaps, you identified the solutions, you plan your activities, you have timelines, you contact the notified body, you know how much time you have to implement all the solutions. You need to go forward and to execute your plan. So there's 2 things which have to be done in parallel. One is the implementation or update of your quality management system. Your quality management system shall be compliant with the IVDR, with the requirements which are listed in Article 10. You need to identify or hire a person which is responsible for the regulatory compliance. More information about this PRRC, it's found in a guideline which is already available, and an MDCG guideline. And for building the new regulatory requirements in the QMS, you may also use the guideline that I've put here. As said before, you need to update your PMS and the vigilance processes. well, for the PMS process, for the Class C and D devices, instead of having a post-market surveillance report, now we have a periodic safety update report, which has to be updated every year. And also for the vigilance process, there are some changes which were introduced typically for the declaration of critical cases before the deadline of reporting those was of 30 days, now will be 15 days. We are also talking about the clinical evidence. This morning we have talked a lot with Robin about it. Well, the clinical evidence, all the data which is coming from the clinical evidence will be found in a report which is called the performance evaluation report. So as a legal manufacturer, you need to implement a process which will allow you to gather this data. And also, I'm talking about the performance evaluation report, but it's also, you have to plan those activities, so you also have a performance evaluation plan. As we said before, there's this new requirements on the UDI system. You need also to have a process which allows you to manage the labeling of your products and also the reporting with the EU database, which is UDAMED. As said before as well, the economical operators, now the MAIDs, have an increasing role and responsibilities. As a legal manufacturer, you need to have a process which will allow you to manage the interaction that you will have with all the economical operators. One way of doing that is also to have in place a quality agreements with them. And of course, what is also new for self-certified manufacturer of self-certified tests is that we also will have now the possibility by the notified bodies to have unannounced inspections. So those, as a legal manufacturer, you need to have in place a process, a procedure which will allow you to deal and to manage in case of unannounced inspection. Well, for the update of the technical documentation, basically, if I will have to summarize what it's found in this, written in this slide, I think I can make it in one word, is that the intended purposes of the device must be substantiated by your clinical evidence. So all this clinical evidence we will find in your technical documentation. So if you check in the Annex 2 and 3 of the IVDR, you may find the structure of the technical documentation, the requirements for the structure of the technical documentation. Basically, we need to have information about the device description, its specification, also information about the labeling of the device. When I'm talking about the labeling, I'm talking about the labels, but also the instruction for use. Device description, of course, if I'm coming back to that, it's a clear description of the intended use of the device, intended user, what is the analyte, what are the diseases which are target, or what is the condition which is target by this device. We'll need also information about the design of the device, also about the manufacturing. Here, I would like to underline the fact that the legal manufacturer has the responsibility of the manufacturing process, so he has to show that he's controlling this process. We will expect here to have manufacturing maps where it shows the manufacturing sites, the manufacturing, critical manufacturing processes, manufacturing process validation, and also quality controls, particularly for the critical critical steps. We would like to see the quality controls, how they are done, and also what are the sampling schemes that you apply, and also what are the acceptance criteria. Of course, as for the EER checklist, the legal manufacturer need to show compliance with the applicable GSPR. So we will expect to have a GSPR checklist. Also, a risk analysis for each device and a risk management report, which has to make reference and a conclusion based on with a disclosure in the residual risk, and also a statement on the overall risk benefit ratio. Stability is another important point, not only shelf life, but also in stability and transport stability. Coming to the analytical performance of the device, here we would like to understand what is the capacity or the performance of the device on measuring correctly the analyte. We will expect here to have information about the specimen type, accuracy of measurement, analytical sensitivity. So to give you, again, if I'm taking back the example of a test which measures for the diagnostic of cancer, if the test is supposed to be done on samples of plasma, serum, and blood, well, we will expect to have data which show evidence that this test is accurate for all those specimen types, have stability of the specimens, analytical sensitivity. Again, we are talking here about the lower limit of detection, of blank, of quantitation. Those should be proven, and we need evidence for each of the specimen types which are used. The specificity of the device is also important. Typically, data about the possible interference and cross-reactivity, range of the assay, range of linearity, particularly for quantitative tests. Cutoff, of course, is very important. And then we can go to the clinical performance. Here, we would like to understand, we would like to see evidence showing that the test it's performant and safe for its intended use as claimed by the manufacturer. So here we are talking about clinical studies, but it can also be, as said by Robin, data from literature. When we have a test, particularly this is important for new devices which uses new biomarker which are on the market in an in vitro diagnostic test for the first time. For those, we really need to have a very good and strong scientific validity. This may come from literature, but it also can come from a proof of concept study or from clinical studies. As said before, and also as stated in Annex 3 of the Annex 2 and 3 of the IVDR, the performance evaluation plan and report are a part of this technical documentation, as well as the PMS plan, including the PMPF, so is the post-market performance follow-up plan, and also the periodic safety update report for Class C and D devices. For the Class A and B devices, we are talking still of a post-market surveillance report. Of course, here I gave an example, the a Class C device, but as a legal manufacturer, you have to keep in mind that even if the scrutiny and the level of the data which is available will depend on the classification of your device, the structure of the technical documentation and the information that should be inside, it's the same for all the devices independently of its classification. Now that so you got the knowledge, you identified the gap, the solution, you plan them, you execute them. The second thing to do before going into a conformity assessment by a notified body would also be to make a final review of your documentation. We strongly suggest here to perform an internal audit on your quality management system, and also to perform a pre-submission review of the whole technical documentation. As such, this will allow you to fix problems if you find any problem either in your quality management system or in the technical documentation. You can fix those problems up front before going into the conformity assessment. Once you are successful, you may go on to the conformity assessment with a notified body. It means that the notified body will assess the quality management system, and if it's successful, will issue a quality management system certificate, the same for the technical documentation, and you as the legal manufacturer, you may put on the market your device. You'll register your device and put it on the market. So as a conclusion of my presentation, I would say that as a legal manufacturer of IVD devices, self-certified IVD devices, is that the chances are that due to the classification of the products, the product will switch to a class of classification which will involve the conformity assessment by a notified body, meaning that the conformity assessment will be done and the requirements or the scrutiny of the review of your technical documentation and QMS quality management system will increase. The bottom line that there are still 2 years where you may have time to increase the to implement the gaps, to identify and the gaps in your technical documentation, and also to find the solutions and to implement those before being able to go into the conformity assessment by a notified body. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm ready to take any question, if any.
Thank you very much, Silvia. There was much ongoing in the chat, and
yes, I've seen 15 new chats. I didn't saw them.
Yeah, most of the questions have already been answered or postponed to Mrs. Ose's talk. Here's one question. If the EC certificate is valid until 2024, should manufacturer need to register new products according to the IVDR? And if manufacturer wants to add new language version or brands to the existing basic product, then he needs to register according to the IVDR, even through the basic product has certification until 2024.
If I may take this part, I thought that it might be a good idea to have a short discussion on what we would call the transition period, which is the date of application of the IVDR and the transition period of at that time valid EC certificates. So there are requirements for the notified body and for the manufacturer as well. And I would like to highlight this. The most important part is that existing certificates, even with a validity date May 2024, shall not be changed. So if you want to change something, we cannot change that certificate anymore. So this will remain valid as is as of 27th of May 2022. But I will point that out in my presentation a little bit later.
I don't know whether this question also includes a reference to Udamed, because to register the new product according IVDR, there is a request for registration nationally already. I mean, in every country. But as soon as Udamed will be up, you will have to register those devices that are under IVDD also into Udamed. If this is part of the question, I suppose, because it asks for registration specifically.
Okay, and then there is another question, how to recognize that an IVD medical device already meets with the new legal requirements?
A good practice for me would be to say that when assessing the requirements is to start with the GSPR, in fact. As a legal manufacturer, you probably already have a ER checklist. The same you have to do it with the GSPRs, and going through all those GSPR and see if you have the data available in order to be compliant with any of those. There are 20 of those GSPR, so really we were talking about this clinical evidence. There's GSPR number 9. You have to go through it and you see if the data that you have currently it's compliant with those requirements.
What we see for most of our customers, what they do is they compare the essential requirements to the general performance and safety requirements, have a kind of gap analysis in place, and this has been started for them as of date of validity of the IVDR. So they are all working on that. So they have been working on that since 2017, meaning that some of them really identified gaps in their technical documentation. But to be honest, the IVDR in Annex 2 for the technical documentation appears to me like clearly specifying the requirements. It was very nebulous in Annex 1 of the directive, but still, when you look into the harmonized standards to the directive, you would find all of those things required in a technical file under the IVD directive as well. So there are no really new requirements except for the in-depth analysis of clinical data.
I mean, I think if we compare to MDR, the major shift is in the expectation related to the quality of the evidence.
Yeah.
And there, the notified bodies, the competent authorities, they have different expectations now than probably have been executed in the past. And I think this is also a reason why out of those 22 notified bodies that are still designated under the in vitro diagnostic directive for IVDs, we will see plenty of them disappearing.
Michael, I really disagree. I know that there are quite a few in the process of application and very far in their process of application, which in fact had been postponed. So joint assessment team inspections did not take place during the COVID crisis, and all of the scheduled audits were not performed. So there is a delay, of course, and this delay might lead to high workload at the side of the competent authority and the Commission towards the end of the transition period. But I'm aware of a lot of I'm aware of a few notified bodies that currently undergo the inspection process and the review process of corrective actions. So there are more to come. So please don't worry.
No, there are more to. I would be the happiest man in the world if there will be 22 notified bodies under IVDR. But probably I will be disappointed.
Michael. Schwarzseher.
It's not so bad, Michael, because we also do know that the notified bodies are really increasing their numbers. I think, one of the big ones employed 350 new staff in the last year. So even though there might be fewer, I think they're really, because the requirements are very tough for notified bodies to have the correct expertise, it is weeding out some of those notified bodies, but those that do take it on are really, I think, beefing up their numbers and making sure they have the right expertise to be designated.
Sure. I mean, that's right. From a capacity point of view, there will be fewer notified bodies, but those will have a higher capacity. But the thing from a manufacturer point of view, if you look at this, if you are today not with the right notified body, you may have a thrilling wake up.
Michael, if I may say so, if you are not with any accredited certificate, because the accredited certification bodies and the certification according to ISO 13485 is not mandatory. So at that time where you don't even have that, you really have to look out for a body to take you on as a customer, because it will be too late towards the end of 2021 to find any party to accept your application. So it should be now,
Yeah,
not
exactly.
in a year. And so there is some trust required that most of the bigger and well-known certification bodies have already applied, and also the notified bodies in Europe have applied. I know of two only who said they would not continue their work, and also they have returned their notification already. So we know of the British, the UK notified bodies, all except one, and we know that some have transferred their activities into the into one of the European countries. So the customers will have a home. I'm pretty sure.
But additionally to that, there will be more and more than before tests on the market which will need this notified body. So
yes, of course, yeah.
And
the thing is, yeah, what you say, Silvia, the thing is, we will have 5 times more products that will have to undergo scrutiny.
Yeah, that's correct, Michael. But I assume that the Class D devices requiring individual notified body scrutiny on the technical documentation, they are not the major topic here. I assume that it will be the Class C devices, and as you may have noted, the Commission turned the expectations down towards 5% of the product of the sampling plan of the products to be reviewed during the 5-year certification period. So it's not that awful.